The marshlands of Jarrow Slake were already a pretty grim place to begin with. And it was a cold, dreary expanse of mud and water. And it was always surrounded in mist and misery. Now you add the silhouette of a gibbet to the scene.
I don't understand anything that's happening right now.
Okay. You're not familiar with a gibbet? I think you are. You just don't recognize the word.
Is it a boat?
No.
It sounds like a boat.
A gibbet is a giant wooden post with a cage on top of it. And inside that cage, swaying gently in the wind, a corpse.
Yeah. Okay, now I getcha.
Tarred, blackened, and left to decay for all to see. Welcome to one of England's last gibbeting cases, featuring a man named William Jobling. Now, it was 1832, and the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. Life for coal miners at this point, not great, not glamorous. The days were long, the work grueling, and the pay was barely enough to scrape by. Jobling lived in County Durham, an area brimming with social unrest as workers fought for better wages and conditions. And tensions ran high, and desperation was a very common thing. It was tough when you lived in that class at that time because there was no support system. Jobling's story begins on a fateful day in July of 1832. He and a friend, Ralph Armstrong, were out on a stroll near South Shields. This is all in the UK. Reportedly, they were enjoying the kind of intoxicating camaraderie that only cheap liquor can provide.
Intoxicating, literally.
So they're walking along and they see a guy. His name's Nicholas Fairless. Now, he's a local magistrate. And for some reason, and the reason remains a bit murky, some sort of an altercation broke out. Okay. Some say Fairless reprimanded the guys because it was the middle of the day and they're out just drinking cheap liquor, walking through the countryside. And others say that he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But whatever happened, things escalated quickly. We do know that. And Fairless was brutally beaten. And he succumbed to his injuries soon after the encounter. Now, let's be clear. Jobling wasn't the main aggressor. Witnesses claimed Armstrong delivered the fatal blows, but in the chaos, it was Jobling who got caught. He was the one that got tried, and he was convicted of murder. And his sentence was death by hanging, followed by gibbeting. Because if there's one thing that 19th century England enjoyed was a good public spectacle. Now, Jobling's execution, I shouldn't be laughing at that. Jobling's execution took place on August 3rd, 1832. I guess it's long enough ago, so. It was a grim affair, as most hangings were. I can't imagine any of them were, well, maybe some were jovial. I don't know, depending upon who was being hung or hanged. But what comes next is even grislier. They handed his body over to be prepared for display. And this wasn't just a quick post-mortem humiliation. The process was meticulously macabre. First, Jobling's corpse was coated in tar. And this wasn't just for dramatic effect, though it certainly added a level of horror to things, I would imagine. The tar served a practical purpose, slowing down decomposition. Once tarred, his body was placed in an iron gibbet cage, a custom-made contraption that was designed to hold his remains in a semi-upright position. The cage was then transported to Jarrow Slake, which is that marshy expanse, and they chose that because it was near Jobling's home. The gibbet was erected in a prominent spot visible for miles around, and that must have been really weird. You're walking through your neighborhood. Maybe you're working in a coal mine and you have to walk by this thing every day.
Yeah, and it's really kind of shitty that they're like, let's do it near his house.
Yeah, so his family and loved ones can see it.
Right. That's not harming him. He's dead.
Well, that's the thing. And people began to, there was an uprising. Because it was visible for miles around, just swaying in the breeze. So it wasn't just grotesque. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare. The authorities wanted to send a message. This is what happens when you mess with the system and question authority. For the local community, his friends and loved ones, Jobling's gibbeting was more than punishment. It was a curse. The marshlands of Jarrow Slake was already kind of a desolate, eerie place, but now they had a centerpiece for the terror. Fishermen refused to cast their nets near the site. They were convinced that the waters were tainted by Jobling's spirit. Some claimed to hear ghostly moans carried across the wind. Others swore they saw a shadowy figure wandering in the marshes at night. And of course, superstition took root quickly, and Jobling's gibbet became a focal point for fear and folklore. Now, to understand the impact of gibbeting, it's, I think, valuable to take a look at its history. Gibbeting wasn't a common punishment, even in England's blood-soaked legal tradition. It was particularly gross and grotesque and extreme. It was reserved for the most heinous crimes, or those that authorities wanted to make a particularly strong example of. Now, the practice dated back centuries, but by Jobling's time, it was already falling out of favor. His case was a throwback to darker days. It was a last-ditch effort to terrify the masses into submission. So the logistics of gibbeting were as grim as the act itself. The iron cage was custom-made to fit the deceased, and it was often contorted to hold the body in a specific pose, something that might even be humiliating, even more than being killed and tarred and hung up to, become like a neighborhood decoration. The gibbet post had to be tall enough to make the display visible from afar, and the site was chosen for maximum exposure. Now, in Jobling's case, the authorities picked Jarrow Slake not only because it was near his home, but because it was a prominent location where the workers, the coal miners, and travelers would pass by. The message, it was pretty clear. If you defy the law, this could be you.
Yeah, but at least it wasn't bees. When you described the giblet,
yeah.
giblet,
gibbet, yeah.
Gibbet, not giblets. That would be different.
No.
I pictured the Wicker Man, obviously, and the bees, and not the bees, And so at least you're already deceased when you're in the gibbet, and there's no bees involved.
Yeah, it's a good thing they use tar too, and not honey, because that would have attracted more bees. I would think. But for all its intended impact, gibbeting often backfired, especially by this time in the early 19th century. Instead of instilling fear, it started to breed resentment.
Sure.
Communities saw it as a grotesque overreach, a punishment that punished not just the criminal, but everyone forced to live in its shadow.
Right.
And the fact that they chose, it's right a couple of blocks away from his family's house, was terrible. In Jarrow Slake, the sight of Jobling's body hanging in the gibbet quickly became a source of anger and sorrow for the locals. The display didn't last too long. They got to a point where they just couldn't look at Jobling's corpse anymore, and it was just too much for them to bear. Now, stories vary, but it's widely believed that sympathizers cut down the gibbet under cover of darkness and gave Jobling a proper burial in the dark of night. Whether they did it out of compassion or defiance or sheer disgust is anyone's guess.
Yeah.
What's certain is that Jobling's gibbeting marked the end of an era. Public opinion began to turn against such barbaric punishments, and by early 19th century, gibbeting was seen as both cruel and ineffective. And instead of deterring crime, it fueled resentment toward the authorities and added a layer of horror to an already grim justice system.
Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine being the family, like the spouse or the children of a person. And you haven't done anything wrong.
No.
And yet you are exposed to this decaying body of your loved one on the daily.
Yeah. I picture a kid playing out in the yard and somebody stops by and asks for directions. And he's like, go down 2 blocks and take a left next to my dead father's tarred corpse.
Yeah.
Jobling was one of the last such displays in England. The practice was soon relegated to the annals of macabre history.
You said annals.
The marshes of Jarrow Slake retained a very sinister reputation after the giblet.
I'm sorry. I said giblet and I've ruined everything. This is my fault. I take full accountability for the gibleting.
The marshes of Jarrow Slake retained their sinister reputation long after the gibbeting and the gibbet was removed. Folklore has a way of lingering, though, especially when it involves restless spirits and cursed waters. And even today, the tale of William Jobling serves as a reminder to the locals of the lengths to which authorities once went to maintain control. It wasn't just the marshes that were haunted, according to people in the area, but the people were too. For years after the gibbet was removed, locals reported strange occurrences near the site. Fishermen's nets would come up empty, even in waters that were once incredibly abundant. It seems as though they just vacated the area for some reason.
Maybe it was the tar.
That's an interesting thought.
You can't go around polluting your local waterways and expect fish to just hang out.
Travelers claimed that they had felt icy chills as they passed through the area, particularly where the gibbet once stood. And even that happened even on the warmest days. And there was talk of this mournful cry, a faint mournful cry that would waft across the misty swamp. Some claimed the marsh itself was cursed and that it would claim anyone who lingered too long. Others swore they'd seen Jobling's ghost, his tar-blackened corpse, still swaying in an invisible cage.
Ooh.
There is no denying the psychological impact such a grisly spectacle can make. Jobling's gibbeting wasn't just a punishment, it was a scar on the memory of the community still to this day. And today, Jarrow Slake is far from a desolate marsh that it once was. Industrial development has transformed the landscape. The gibbet, of course, is long gone, but if you ask the right person, maybe an old timer that lives there, and you ask him about the local folklore of that event, and you might hear whispers of a ghost that still haunts the marshes, or what's left of it. They'll tell you about the restless spirit of a tar-blackened man doomed to wander the site of his final humiliation. And whether you believe them or not, one thing is certain, William Jobling's story is not easy to forget. And I would imagine that people who live in that area and generations of their family have, that story has been passed down over the years as a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
Don't go out at night in the marshes, and if you do, don't kill a magistrate. You know.
No, I mean, good advice.
This information comes from BBC History Magazine. The English Gibbets, Crime and Punishment in the 19th Century by Neil Hansen, and Jarrow Slake and the Gibbeting of William Jobling, Local Histories of Durham.
Jarrow Slake, Jobling's gibbet is hard to say.
It is hard to say. Jobling's Jarrow Slake gibbet.
Gibbeting.
Gibbeting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to leave it at that.